Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Today we have episode 6 of the King Chronicles. Today we are going to be discussing The Stand. If this is your first time watching one of my King Chronicles videos, welcome. The purpose here is that I am reading all of Stephen King's work in publication order. These videos are full of spoilers. We talk about fun facts regarding the book, my personal thoughts on the book, themes, motifs, that kind of thing, any connections to the Stephen King universe as a whole. So that's kind of what it is. If you want a little bit more detail, I will link the introduction video up above, as well as the playlist for the King Chronicles in case you want to watch any other ones. So as always, to start off with, we are just going to talk about some basic facts for The Stand. The Stand was first published in September of 1978. Now, keep in mind that the version that you see here on my shelf is actually the complete and uncut edition. Now, the complete and uncut edition wasn't released until the early 90s. Basically, it went from like 800 pages to like 1,000 pages. There was a lot more material that was added. There are certain people who think that the original version that was published is the better version. I personally have not read the original Stand. I have only read the complete and uncut edition, so I don't have an opinion as far as that goes. So even though the uncut edition wasn't published until whenever the heck it was published, I'm drawing a blank right now and it's not in my notes. We're going to be discussing mostly the uncut edition today. So, like I said, it was originally published in 78, and when it was published in 78, the setting for the book was in 1980. However, when the paperback version came out in 1980, they upped the date to 1985 so that it wouldn't be like actually current. Oh, you know what? That was in my notes literally the whole time. The uncut edition was released in 1990. Which added some material, it revised some material, and it changed the setting as well to 1990. And one of the other things that he did, we know that Stephen King loves pop culture references, and so he inserted a lot of those pop culture references into the uncut edition, I guess, to make it feel more like it was happening, like right now. The story itself was kind of meant to be like King's version of Lord of the Rings, very like sweeping saga with many characters, and it's the ultimate good versus evil. And the story itself was actually also inspired by George Stewart's Earth Abides, which I personally haven't read. I don't have any information on that particular book at all. So one of the things that I mentioned in the video about The Shining is that for a while, King and his family did live in Boulder, Colorado. And apparently while they were there, they did see a segment on 60 Minutes about like biowarfare. And that's actually one of the things that inspired this particular story. There's a point during his writing where he actually almost gave up because of writer's block. I can imagine with a story that large that the writer's block was real. Not that I'm a writer, I don't know what that feels like. So an 8-hour miniseries was adapted from the book in 1994. It had apparently been in development hell since 1980. And originally he only wanted either himself to do it or he wanted George Romero to do it. And I guess that just never happened. And so he finally relented and was like, fine, you can have it. And that is the miniseries that had Rob Lowe, and I cannot remember anyone else's name that was in that. I just remember Rob Lowe was Nick Andros. Then as far as other adaptations go, apparently since 2011, there's been talks of them doing a feature-length film with then a series on Showtime, I think, but it seems to have been placed on hold as of right now. I couldn't find very much information on it. It seems to be, once again, in development hell. I don't know if that's something that we'll ever get again. Okay, so those are the fun facts. So let's talk about like my actual thoughts on the book itself. I think that personally, this is probably one of my favorite Kings that I've read up until this point. And the reason for that is just because it's so, yeah, it's really long, and yeah, it'll give you a book slump, but it's immersive and it's terrifying. And I think one of the reasons that it is so terrifying is because it feels real. The whole thing is that we created Captain Trips, and that is terrifying. And the fact that that is something that absolutely could happen, I think, is the most terrifying thing of all. You know, the heart of the story is you're taking this group of survivors that has survived this absolutely horrific thing, you know, and watching them kind of trying to reform society. Meanwhile, evil in its truest form, other people, have always been, you know, waiting in the wings. So there's this huge wide cast of characters that, you know, all really bring different things to the story. I think that's both a positive and a negative in this book, because there is such an enormous cast of characters, and I think that at moments it does tend to make the actual text drag a little bit, but I think at the end of the day, you really need all of those characters to really, you know, create that society and like that reforming of society. I think that it's important, you know, in that rebuilding phase. As far as like general complaints, I think that my biggest complaint is, again, just the sheer size of the uncut edition. When you get done reading it, you're just like, oh my God, I don't want to read anything ever again, because it's so enormous. And I actually, whenever I did the reread for this video, which was months ago, actually, I listened to it on audio, and I listened to it very quickly because I think that I was like on vacation or something at the time, but it's just a lot. It's so much, you know, and yeah, it is a lot, but at the end of the day, like, again, I love the story as a whole, honestly, and the whole good versus evil, and that evil in its truest form is other people. I love that, and I love that for the most part that the villains in this book are, yes, there's definitely like that supernatural element, you know, with Walter or the Man in Black, but I think that most of the villains in this book are just everyday people, and that's one of the things that I like the best. You know, talking about how evil humanity can be. I just find that whole conversation very compelling. And I think that that's one of the things that makes the novel itself so successful. Yes, it's a post-apocalyptic setting, but when you look at the reality of it, you know, especially today, this is a book that was written, you know, in the 70s and revised obviously later, but when you look at where we are today, like, it's something that could absolutely happen. When you look at certain pandemics that have happened in the last, you know, 10 years or so, it's like, it's scary. Like, maybe not that supernatural element, but, you know, again, like, the world could really be wiped out by a super flu. It's terrifying, you know? And I think that the fact that it feels so real is one of the things that makes this book so successful. That, coupled with, you know, the supernatural element. Yeah, there's the supernatural element of, like, the villains, like I said, but, you know, a lot of the villains are everyday people, and a lot of them are relatable in a lot of ways, especially take someone like Harold. Harold, at the end of the day, is misguided, but, you know, he does set a lot of events into motion. But again, while he does some terrible things, sets things into motion, he is very relatable in some senses. So, you know, once again, you have that very realistic aspect of it. And I think that is, in general, one of the things that makes King as a writer so successful, is that his villains aren't always, you know, vampires and ghosts and something that is supernatural. That he, a lot of times in his writing, takes humanity and the ugly pieces of humanity and makes that the star of his work. And I really, really feel like that is what makes him so successful as a writer. Not even necessarily as horror, because let's be real, when we talk about Stephen King, I feel like he's entirely overrated as a horror author. He writes so much more than that. But when we talk about horror, it's like, oh, Stephen King. Like, there's so much more to horror than Stephen King. And there's so much more to Stephen King than horror. But, you know, I think, anyway, back to the original point, I just feel like that's one of the reasons that, you know, he's such a prolific writer. You know, overall, like I said, I feel like it's one of my personal favorites. I understand that there are a lot of people that think that it's, you know, entirely overrated. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's overrated. If you don't like it, that's fine, but I think you do have to give credit where credit's due. you know, in terms of, you know, what this book is and what it did for the genre. So those are my thoughts. So we're gonna move on to like some of the different themes and everything that run out throughout the book. So very obviously, the biggest theme in this book is definitely gonna be good versus evil. Like, we can't even begin to sidestep that. That's the theme of the book. Like, if you actually look, you know, at the cover here, you know, when you look at this cover, you have light and dark, they're fighting. So good versus evil, clearly. We have the appearance of Randall Flagg, and this is the first real appearance that he has made, and he is a character that will come into play in many, many other works of King's. He's a character that is pure evil, and he amplifies the evil in others. You know, you have Nadine Cross and Harold, who are, you know, pretty normal people, but Flagg has really come in and amplified that evil, you know. And then on the flip side of that, you have Mother Abigail. You know, she's the earthly embodiment of goodness. She is that goodness, that the foil that we need for Randall Flagg. You know, and the whole good versus evil thing is really where the title of the book comes into play. You know, you're making a stand against evil, you're making a stand for goodness. Another thing that we talk a lot about in this book is the whole idea of like sacrifice for the greater good. You know, I think that's pretty clear in the way that kind of like everything comes down, and the way that they have to make it to Vegas, and the sacrifices that they all have to make. You know, there are sacrifices that have to be made to get to the other side, and you know, to really maintain that peace. You know, you have Ralph, Glenn, Larry, and Stu, who all go to Vegas to protect the free zone and make that stand. And, you know, only one of those men walk away from that and sacrifice themselves to maintain the free zone, and, you know, to really make sure that the work that they have done isn't undone. You know, in the meantime, you have someone, you know, as important as Nick. He was very important through most of the time during the free zone, who was also sacrificed eventually. Another thing that it talks a lot about is, you know, people can accomplish a lot whenever they come together. That in itself is really shown whenever we actually get to the free zone. You know, there's the crews that work to get the power back on, and they have to go through and turn off all the appliances that were in the housing. You know, they put together a group to do that. They had to bury people that were left. They put together a group to do that, and they really rebuilt a society. And they couldn't have done that if they all hadn't have, you know, come together. You know, that togetherness is really what helped them accomplish that. And I'm sure that there's a lot more themes, but like those are just really the big ones that come to mind. So from there, we're moving into the characters, and there are a lot of characters, so I'm not gonna go like super in depth in any of these, and there will be some that I just don't cover. So first one obviously being Randall Flagg. Like, how can we not open up and talk about him? Because he is the devil. He's not really, well, yeah, I guess he kind of is the devil. I don't know. He's a representation of the devil. How about that? This is our first book where Flagg himself is named, but I feel like his idea, you know, and really that feeling of darkness has really permeated itself through several of the other books that King has written up until this point. You know, he's really a guy that only showed up after the worst of it, when people were at their weakest, and, you know, really use the weakness in people to, you know, amplify that evil. You know, it's really easy for him to go through and, you know, collect his people that he brings to Vegas, and it's easy for him to get his people in place. And I think the reason for that is because being evil is easy. I think that doing the right thing is usually the hardest course of action to take. You know, a lot of times there's that sacrificial element whenever you talk about, you know, sacrificing for the greater good and things like that. And at the core of most people, like, humans are selfish. Let's just throw it all out there. Humans are selfish. And so, you know, when you take somebody who amplifies evil, and, you know, being evil is easy because at the end of the day, like, you're just out for yourself. You know, you definitely see that whenever you look at someone like Lloyd, when you look at the kid, when you look at Trash Can Man, you know, and really even Harold too. Those people are much more selfish than a lot of the other people that we see. And of course, we have the foil for Flagg, which is Mother Abigail. I really appreciated the fact that, like, not only is she human, but she knows she's human, and she has those internal struggles. She realizes that she's the chosen one, and at one point she felt like it went to her head, and so she went to deal with that on her own. She's not a supernatural character. She only comes in, she wants to serve God, she wants to serve the greater good, and serve the people who come to her. and like be that guiding light that she needs to be, but only because, you know, God has asked her to bear this burden. She's really just there to provide like a base level of guidance. I feel like her role in everything is not very large. She is like that beacon, you know, she comes through in dreams to lead people to Hemingford Home and then to get them to Boulder. You know, that again is her role. And at the end of the day, it is a pretty small role to play because she's not part of the free zone. So now I have Harold, and Harold's a character that I'm kind of like sympathetic about to a point, but he's just so selfish, and, you know, allows that selfishness to become weakness. And, you know, that's how he ends up with Flag to begin with. I think that his, how young he is and his immaturity is one of the reasons that he kind of ended up in the place that he did. I feel like that's also one of the things that made him more relatable, but also I think that he is a really good example of like toxic masculinity in a way, you know, and like that entitlement that he felt to Fran. Which, speaking of Fran, I feel like she's one of the better women that King has written up until this point. You know, I say that, but she's one of the only women that we've really gotten to know, because he hasn't really done like in-depth like character studies. We haven't really seen a ton of character development up until this point. As one of the only women that was included, though, like she provides like this level of softness, I guess, that I feel like we really needed, because it's a cast of men. Like, she was necessary, I guess. You know, she's nice to a point, and she's nice to Harold to a point, but I think that like it's definitely her rejection of Harold that pushes him over the edge into the dark side, so to speak. You know, at the end of the day, I feel like Fran is one of those people that's also very selfish, but I feel like at the end of the day, you know, especially because by the end of the book, she's becoming a mother and things like that. You know, she understands what sacrifice is. So we come to Stuart Redman, who is the lone survivor of the Vegas aftermath. You know, he's definitely a quiet man, but his whole thing is like he's quiet, but he stands up for what's right no matter what. And, you know, at the core, that's what the book is about. So he is like the embodiment of that whole concept. He's very conflicted about the role that he plays at times, you know, and I think that also makes him a little bit more relatable. He's very, you know, he understands that the world is in shades of gray, in a sense. You know, it's not just black and white. I think that as a character, he's balanced, but, you know, he still has room to grow. And I think that that is, you know, ultimately what lets him survive that final event. So Larry Underwood, it comes up several times during the book. You know, Larry's not a nice guy, but it's very obvious that he wants to be. And I think that that's what's important about his character, is that he kind of shows that there's definitely like room for redemption. The situation that he came from and the way that things happened, like as everything started to go down with Captain Trips, I feel like he easily could have ended up in Vegas, but he made those hard decisions to, you know, to go in the right direction. And I think that that was his purpose in the novel, is to show that, you know, you can come from worse situation, and as long as you're consciously making the decision to be better, like you can get to where you want to be. That redemption is possible, you know. But then we come to Nick Andros. Nick Andros, from the beginning, like he's a natural leader. You know, he's overall just a good person, and we really see that from the very beginning. As you learn his story, you kind of learn, you know, like he was dealt a hard hand in his life, but I think that that's what actually like made him a good person. I am also a firm believer that his death was necessary. I think that as far as character development, he didn't have anywhere else to go. And I think that because like he was such a good person, I think that his death was necessary for the other characters to grow and really figure shit out. I think if he would have remained alive, then the story wouldn't have developed quite in the way that it did. And the last character that I'm gonna like actually go into is Nadine Cross. She's really sympathetic to me because it seems like she never really had a choice in terms of like being Flags, you know, like it was a thing from when she was young that she was always going to be his. And it really seems like she doesn't really want any part of it. You know, she goes along with it, and then at the last minute she's like, nope, I'm not, I can't, I'm not. And, you know, ultimately foils his plan. Like she was basically supposed to give birth to the Antichrist or something. She's like, nope, had enough, thanks, no thanks, bye. So, you know, ultimately she was kind of shit, but, you know, she did her part to make sure that things She sacrificed. There you go. See, there it is again. She sacrificed herself to make sure that, you know, it wasn't a thing anymore. And I think that her purpose is really like to show that it's never too late to do the right thing, because at that point, like, it seemed like, all right, this is gonna be a thing that happens. Like, everything is, you know, already mapped out. This is the way that it's gonna go. And at the last minute, she's like, actually, no, I make the decision to not be a part of it. And I'm not gonna go over any other characters just because we'll be standing here for a year or 3 hours. I don't know, just because there's so many characters. But anyway, yes. Okay, so now we come to the final part, which is connections. And there are some connections to other works in this book. So for the first time, like I said, we're actually getting a name for the Dark Man, who kind of permeates through several other of King's works. I think personally that he first appeared in Carrie. That's probably a little bit of a reach, but that's, you know, just my personal interpretation here. Night Shift was published previously to this, and obviously we have that connection to the short story Night Surf, which is where kind of the idea for this whole book, you know, really came about. It began as the short story, and I enjoyed reading that story first because it was very interesting to see how, you know, the general idea of this morphed into this epic book. The Stand is also connected to the short story The Last Rung on the Ladder because it takes place in Hemmingford Home, which we know that's the home of Mother Abigail. So when the uncut edition was also published in 1990, with the addition of some of those works, there were some other connections that were made to work that was published in between this and that. So what I think that I'll probably do, because I don't want to mention those works because we haven't like discussed them in detail yet, is I'll probably do like an updated connections video whenever we talk about the uncut edition in the 1990s. So whenever we actually get to the uncut edition, I'll probably just, you know, like, hey, this is a connections update. We won't, you know, go back and discuss the book as a whole since we're doing that now. Or I may just include, you know, the fact that it's connected to the Stand in that actual, you know, video for those particular books. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how I do it. But anyway, okay. So that is The Stand. How do you feel about this book? I feel like it's one of those polarizing works. People think that it's absolutely brilliant, or people don't think that it's brilliant at all and they think that it's like over bloated and whatever. So I'm very interested to see your thoughts down below. Seeing as this video is full of spoilers, you don't have to necessarily censor yourself in the comments, but if you would like to reach out to me personally, you can do that through any of my social media links that can be found down below. You can reach me on Twitter, Goodreads, and Instagram. Next time we will be discussing The Long Walk, which is the second Bachman book. As always, if you like what you see and you want to see more, make sure you click thumbs up or hit subscribe if you have not already. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Bye.